Would you run as an independent, or would you run for the Green Party nomination?
Well, if I run, and we are testing the waters now, I would certainly go for ballot lines with the Green Party.
So you would run against Cynthia McKinney?
We'll go for, well, that remains to be seen. It's a little early right now, but we'll go independent in states where there aren't any parties. We'll look for progressive small parties at the state level. You have to do that just to get on state ballots where there are very obstructive rules.
Ralph Nader, Cynthia McKinney, your response to his possible run also for the Green Party nomination?
Well, I think it's wonderful for voters to have choice. In fact, I recall a visit that I had in Washington State where a gentleman who was also very supportive of my candidacy went into the grocery store and came out and was shaking his head, and he said, "There's 8 different varieties of Oreo cookies in there, but I'm supposed to restrict my choices to 2 political parties." And so really the whole effort that we're engaged in is trying to make sure that voters have choice, and that voters, people who are in the potential electorate become members of the electorate, that we expand the electorate. America can only be better with more people participating in the process. And there are impediments to that participation. Of course, we know that from what happened in Florida, what happened in Ohio, what's happened with me, quite frankly, in Georgia. And
explain what happened with you in Georgia.
Well, of course, in Georgia, we've got some pretty restrictive laws, and we've challenged them in the courts, the open primary, the second primary. And basically, by utilizing the open primary, people can go to the polls and they can pick up a ballot of a political party of which they have never before participated. And that's what's happened to me twice.
Explain what happened exactly. You're saying that Republicans came and voted in the Democratic primary to get you out?
Yes, to determine, and so their votes then determined who the Democratic nominee was going to be. Now, we've got some Supreme Court decisions in 1990, California v. Jones, where the Supreme Court has said that malicious crossover in open primaries could be unconstitutional. And that is something that needs to be tested in the courts. It would, of course, be better if Georgia just changed its open primary statute, but that's not in the cards. But we also look at, for example, other favorites now in the presidential race who have dropped out. For example, Dennis Kucinich is in a situation in Ohio where he is now being targeted. And so...
Targeted by?
Well, that remains to be seen, but there's an awful lot of money that has been dropped into his opponent, for one of his opponents for his congressional district. And
into another Democrat.
Another Democrat, that's correct. And so in talking to Dennis, what I've discovered is that while nominally Ohio does not have an open primary, but in practice, it can be open, and he's got 40% independents in his district who could then become active in the Democratic primary, and they could do so in such a way that could endanger Dennis Kucinich. So we have to look very carefully at the constructs that have been built that basically deny opportunity to those who have a different point of view. And guaranteed, I have a different point of view. But does that mean that my point of view isn't valid in the political, as a part of the political consensus of our country? No, it doesn't. But we only also have to just look back at when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., since I'll be speaking tomorrow at SUNY New Paltz, and, well, actually tonight at SUNY New Paltz about the life and the times of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but, you know, he said that he was greatly, deeply disappointed in America, but there could be no great disappointment where there is no great love. And it was during this time when he was trying to decide what he was going to do, what his position was going to be with respect to the Vietnam War, he said that he had fought his entire life against segregation, and so he couldn't segregate his moral concerns any longer. He had a compulsion to speak out against the Vietnam War, and we know that 1 year later, Dr. King was dead. But during the time of his transformation from a civil rights figure trying to secure the rights of all people in this country, and then moving that into the economic realm to challenge the budget and policy priorities of the United States Congress and the Poor People's Campaign, he was murdered, and those efforts were cut short. With the active participation of people in the media who literally hounded him for the last 5 years of his life, is that what we expect to happen to people who voice their dissent in our country?
Cynthia McKinney, speaking of dissent, one of your last acts in Congress, you were voted out in the last election. One of your last acts in Congress was to call for the impeachment of President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney. It was not only the Republican Party, obviously, that you criticized, but it was your own leadership. It was the Democratic Party. Can you talk about their response to your call?
Well, of course, we've seen what happened with Dennis Kucinich's bill for the impeachment of Dick Cheney. He had mentioned that he was also going to introduce articles of impeachment against Bush, basically our Speaker of the House now. And I have to tell you that I supported Nancy Pelosi for most of my political tenure in the United States Congress, and it was quite a disappointment for her to take impeachment off the table. It is somewhat interesting to watch the dance now that Democrats are making around this issue.
We have 10 seconds. Why do you think they're doing that? Why do you think it's off the table?
Well, I mean, they would have to provide an explanation, and one of the explanations that's been given is that it would be very difficult to defend the action on Fox News. So I don't believe that Fox News ought to be setting the agenda for the Congress.
Cynthia McKinney, I want to thank you very much for being with us, a Green Party presidential candidate. That does it for our broadcast. Our website is democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.